podcasting all the way from California, USA, home to Los Angeles, one of the top fashion cities in the world. This is the Ladybrille Woman Show, a podcast about African fashion, fashion law, fashion business, and the pioneer voice for the African woman entrepreneur. And now your host, the pioneer of the African fashion digital media revolution in the West and the fashion law movement in Northern California, Miss Uduak.
Hello, Ladybrillers, our guests and friends. Welcome everyone to a community of powerful women leaders and entrepreneurs. This is the 43rd episode of the Ladybrille Woman Show. My name is Uduak, Miss Uduak for short. I'm the founder of Ladybrille and a business, fashion, and entertainment lawyer with the law firm of AB2 Law Group PC, located in California, USA. The Ladybrille Woman Show is an inspiring show that celebrates the brilliant women in business and leadership across all industry sectors and across the globe, with an emphasis on the African woman. I'm particularly very excited today because we have the dance movie project representative, Lilian Ajayi-Ore. She's the Chief Marketing Officer working on the project, and it's a project we're happy and proud to sponsor. The film premieres on September 9th, 2016 in Nigeria, but it already enjoyed a premiere in New York, and by the end of the year will be on Netflix. Now, before we meet our guests, so you learn more about the movie, and equally important, learn some wonderful tips that she gives us about marketing, whether we're business owners or professionals interested in personal branding. Before we meet her to learn some of this amazing, insightful tips, let me tell you how you can subscribe to the show. You can subscribe via ladybrillemac.com. You can subscribe via Stitcher Radio, iTunes, or even Google Play. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is Ladybrille at LADYBRILLE. And if you'd like to follow me, the host, on my personal Twitter handle, that's at UDUAK Law. To partner with us for sponsorships, advertising, or to appear on the show as a guest, please email editor@ladybrille.com. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we get to meet Lilian Ajayi-Ore and discuss the dance movie project, a very exciting movie that is the first Afrobeat dance movie ever produced out of the continent. So we're excited about it, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Ladybrille Woman Podcast Show, and we have Lilian Ajayi here with us. Hi, Lilian. How are you?
Hi, Lilian Ajayi-Ore.
Oh, yes. She's recently married. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And, of course, we'll be talking about the movie, the dance movie project, in a quick second. But before that, why don't I have you officially introduce yourself to our community?
Sure. So thank you so much, Uduak, for having me on. I've always been a big fan of Ladybrille, and we really love what you're doing for the community to highlight both the entertainment side as well as women who are doing amazing work and just figuring out this work-life balance. My name, as she mentioned, is Lilian Ajayi-Ore. I am the founder and executive director of Global Connections for Women Foundation. It's abbreviated GC4W, and our mission is to connect, educate, and empower women and girls, throughout the world in the area of leadership, equality, and empowerment. And we have a bunch of programs around that. On the professional side, I am a university professor at NYU-SPS, and my focus area is global marketing as well as digital analytics. So I'm much of a data scientist, so to speak. So a lot of what I do, it's kind of coming up with a marketing strategy for big companies like IBM, Panasonic, you name it, Saks Fifth Avenue. I've worked with a couple of them. And on the analytics side, it's just understanding online behavior and trying to create a predictive pattern for how people are going to react to products and services. And then on the marketing side, figuring out, the best way to communicate to consumers and to make it more of a personal experience so the consumers feel very connected to the brand. So that's what I pretty much focus on.
Wow.
Happy to be here.
Wow. Good to have you. And I know that our community, business, women and men, and certainly leaders can certainly use your services just hearing you say it. So we'll come back to that in a quick minute. But you're here to extend your expertise to discuss a dance movie project as one who is working with that project on a marketing or CMO capacity, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that specific role, and we'll get into the movie later. But I want
Sure.
I want your role. Mm-hmm.
So my engagement with TDMP, which is the abbreviation of the movie, is both personal in a sense that the movie really highlights the struggle of a single parent mom and what it's like to actually go through that in Nigeria, and I'm sure most women can actually relate to some of her challenges and obviously some of the adversities and the challenge of raising two young boys. And beyond that, the message, the borderline message of the movie that focuses on diabetes and, the causation of diabetes, what are the symptoms, how do you manage, how do you cope with the disease. And, it's also an awareness point because it's an area that we don't necessarily want to talk about because we're obviously embarrassed by either when we meet someone who has it, they really don't want to expose themselves or even have you even say, oh, this person has diabetes. But, we find from research that, 1 in 5 people has diabetes. So in your own immediate circle, there's always someone with that disease. But I think the more we call attention to it, the more we can really raise awareness and how people cope with it, how people prevent it. A lot of times people don't know that it is somewhat nutritional based and it's their attitude towards food. And there are certain foods that people don't understand that could actually lead to that. We know that to date, according to some of the research that's out there, there's about 72 million people who are living with the disease. So the capacity in which I join the team to kind of work on the strategy, the marketing strategy, and just the positioning of this movie is one to kind of amplify the voices of women in the fight against diabetes. And then obviously to kind of help with kind of understanding how our audience going to respond to the movie. What other information can we bring to them to make them excited about this movie? And we don't want to forget the fact that it's a dance movie. It's the very first of its kind. It's the first Afrobeat dance movie that's ever been done. So that's incredible within itself. And I think it's a story worth telling because, as you know, there's a lot of Afrobeat influences in our society today, and it's going both from the African market into the mainstream market. And so this movie does a really good job of just capturing both the dance piece of it, the importance of nurturing young talent when it comes to dance, and then of course bringing awareness to just the struggles of a single parent mom who happened to also be diagnosed with diabetes and how she copes with that and how her children kind of help for her, like how they helped to save her life and what they had to do given the fact that she wasn't as supportive of them dancing. And then this dancing thing became an avenue for them to raise money to help their mom out of coma. And then you will see how the story plays out to understand whether or not they were successful at saving their mother's life.
Wow, that's a very powerful storyline. Amazing. I haven't had the chance to see it, but it is going to be premiering in Nigeria. Already did in the U.S., specifically New York, but it will be showing in Nigeria starting September 9th. So we will talk even more about it, but let me take you back to something I said I was interested at the very onset. When you were describing what you do, you parsed it out into 2 areas, 2 categories, the marketing side and then the scientific study of behavior online. So yes. let's get a little insight from you on current trends when it comes to what entrepreneurs and business leaders should be aware of with respect to the marketing side, how you properly position your business for success through marketing trends and analysis, and then your insights as well on the research side, the scientific part of, understanding behavior. Can you shed some light on how you sort of see the trends and data analysis?
Sure. So a lot of what I do, so when I started in the space, I was in the marketing side, and I've always been the person that's always been very curious about the numbers. I couldn't wait. Like once I launched my campaign, I'm like, how did it do? And from just bugging our analytics team internally and to understand the behavior and how people reacted to some of our campaigns, did they buy more? Did they abandon? Did they come to the site? How long did they stay on the site? To the point where my superior at the time was like, Lilian, we're just going to give you access and you can go into the data and scoop it out yourself. So my advice for a lot of entrepreneurs is, a lot of times people are afraid to look at their data, and the data tells you a lot. So for instance, when we had the premiere in New York City, one of the things that we wanted to do was really raise awareness about TDMP, diabetes. And so if you think about it in terms of word association, we wanted to bring awareness to, the filmmaker, which is, Alexander Ajayi-Ore. We also wanted to draw attention on Afrobeat. And then, of course, during the time was also the first time they had the first African Afrobeat festival at Barclays Center. So there was a lot of things going on. And for data analytics piece, what's important is to understand how many people did we reach? Who is what keyword association was becoming affiliated with the TDMP brand, right? So the good news is that because of what we did in terms of strategy, and NYU actually picked up TDMP as a case study, which I use, I use it in my class, my graduate level course, and I also use it in an academic program that I set up for NYU, and then some people use it as well in their courses. But one of the things that we did was we got close to about 10 million people to actually see the impression. And what was interesting, so impressions, as you know, is how many eyeballs. Mm-hmm. An impression for analytics is great, but what we really need is engagement. And what you'll see that when we looked at the data, it was a 1-to-1. So even though we got 10 million people, close to 10 million people to notice TDMP and the African Afrobeat, music festival in terms of associating TDMP with that, we also got about close to 10 million people who were engaged. So engagement is another metric that's really important. So not only do people not only do people see stuff about TDMP out there, they also clicked on it to read more about it. So we grew our numbers by 300,000 percent impression increase from the moment where we didn't have that much noise to now we have a lot of noise. So those things are important because if you want to target a certain market, you want to make sure that there is a positive sentiment. So in addition to understanding all right, we got a lot of people to notice it, we got a lot of eyeballs, we got them to engage, we wanted to know what was the sentiment like. Was it all positive? Was there any negative sentiment? Was there neutral? And the good news is that we had 0% negative. So everyone actually loved it. They felt like it was innovative. There were retweets about it. There were comments about it. People who attended the premiere were able to share what their reviews of the movie was. And it was such a beautiful experience because for the very first time, a movie that nobody knew about, a very small population of people knew about, but we got close to 10 million people in the world to actually get excited just like we were about the movie. And that is something that I measure in terms of, online behavior and online reaction. So that's just one example using the TDMP platform to do that. And even just, kind of going back to the relationship between TDMP and my organization, GC4Women.org, we have a partnership with Nestle. And Nestle, as you know, is a nutrition-based company. They have a ton of products in Africa and other markets as well. And one of the things that we have a partnership with them where we're working on creating an entrepreneurship program where we're teaching people, we're actually giving young entrepreneurs in Nigeria, both, between the ages of 21 and 45 to come up with an idea and then kind of use that idea to cater to the community. How do we reduce the chances that people become diabetic? Or if you are diabetic, how do we help you create a nutritional plan that would help you? And we're also looking at companies that already established any kind of support. So we're going to take them through a boot camp. And then from the boot camp, we're going to give them an opportunity to kind of compete for a certain amount of money, and then the winner would be kind of taken care of in the sense that we'll get mentors, kind of help them set up the business properly, and then, they'll have, overseers from Nestle as well as us, TDMP and GC4W, to kind of help them kind of manage the program to make sure that they have the right audiences for that venture.
Wow.
So those are the kind of things. Yeah. So when you're thinking about analytics and just those are the kind of numbers that we also will share with our partners at Nestle to say that there is an appetite for this movie. And the appetite for this movie extends. Remember I talked about word association? Mm-hmm. So when we look in the word cloud for TDMP, we see diabetes in there. So it's nice to know that people recognize that, yes, this is a dance movie, but it also has an underlying message about diabetes. And I think, that was properly executed through the marketing, to the relationship with, media, news reporters that talked about it. And even people just like really took an interest in the movie, noticed that the diabetes piece was very important.
That is so cool. I really like how you break it down to the views and then people being engaged and then them being engaged, what exactly are their sentiments, and then how you tie all that information to figure out what the next step of action or plan should be. For your marketing analysis or marketing direction to get, consumers and convert. Question on the word association, that's intriguing to me. Mm-hmm. Did you all know, the One Dance music festival or One Dance African music festival that you're talking about that took place in New York, did you all know in advance, okay, it's coming, so let's schedule a date around that, or it just happened to be coincidental that your movie was going to premiere in New York right around that time?
So the answer is yes, we knew about it. Alex is very close. He closely watches like the whole entertainment space, and he's very strategic as well in his positioning, which I think has helped him a lot with this movie and even the placement of this movie. So he knew it was coming, and obviously his colleagues were like, hey, you should definitely consider, showing your movie around this time. And he thought it was a great opportunity. The world is open to Afrobeat. Why not show TDMP? Because it does kind of call attention to this beautiful phenomenon that's going on in the world. So he said, let's do it that same weekend. So the One Africa Dance was on Friday, and then Saturday we had the TDMP premiere, and it was beautiful.
And you had a lot of the people from the One Africa Dance spill over to TDMP.
Yeah, Banky W was there in the audience. He's also in the movie too, so it was nice to have him come and support. Banky W was the host.
I'm just curious about the audience itself. There were 15,000 people at the One Africa Dance. Did they spill over hearing about the TDMP movie premiere? Did you have some of those people? They did. So we had it's a great question. We had a lot of out-of-towners who were here specific for that, but they knew that the movie was also premiering, so they bought tickets. So we had a lot of spillage. So people who wanted to kind of, encourage that whole Africa, they call it the Afrobeat weekend. People just kept going. So they came to that event, they came to our event, and then they just had a beautiful, experience. Wow, that's really good. I like how, just from a marketing standpoint, all of that is thought about in advance, strategically positioned, and you have it convert. Okay, so still for
one word.
Go ahead.
One word that I want to say is that TDMP became very synonymous to the African One Dance Music Festival. Mm-hmm. But to be quite honest, like it also stood on its own. So. It was nice to have that as well as the anchor event that was going on because it happened the day before. But TDMP in itself was also recognized on its own because the story was just beautiful. We had a multicultural people, like a diverse group of people in the audience, and everybody understood everything that was going on. Yes, there was subtitles in the movie, but even beyond that, it was just like everybody was like, I get it. Like, this is great. They all laughed at appropriate times, and they all cried when certain parts were kind of sad and emotional. And it was just beautiful. If I could bottle up, like, the experiences that we heard from people at the movie, I totally would just keep it and just open it up every now and then and be like, wow, I can't believe we actually did this. It was beautiful.
Okay. So just as a general advice for our entrepreneurs listening, particularly women entrepreneurs, as they approach marketing, whether they have a product launch or a service launch, what would be your general tips, maybe not more than 3 tips, before we transition to talk about, more about the movie?
Great question. My biggest thing is like, look at your numbers. A lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want, especially if you are the founder, or the CEO of the company or the co-creator of the idea, you want to look at the numbers. You want to spend, it's not as scary as you think. You want to see how people are reacting to your product or your idea or your invention, because that in itself there are times when companies that I've worked with in the past, kind of got the marketing wrong, and it's because we looked at the data and we saw that, wait a minute, people are not responding as favorable as we want. So we were able to immediately react and do something differently that encouraged people to then respond positively to the brand or whatever the situation might have been. So one big tip is definitely look at your numbers. I would say, Google Analytics is a free tool. It's very easy to set up. Whoever is kind of doing your website, make sure that they set one up for you. There are other free tools, like the one I talked about that tracks your impression. There's something called Keyhole, and it's actually keyhole.co. It's a free app online. You go in, you log in, you put your hashtag in there, and it tells you how things are trends. That's another thing that I definitely encourage is set up an hashtag for your company. Even if it's your company name or the abbreviation of your company, put that on every single tweet that you put out, because that's a very good way of just kind of measuring, how people are relating to or engaging with your brand. And people sometimes forget to put the hashtag on there. You have to put it in so that you can really measure, what the overall reaction is to your brand. And the world that we're in now is like, people talk about big data analytics. Data is important because it provides you with a predictive pattern of what's going to happen, and there are some books that I could recommend. One was written by my mentor. It's called Sexy Little Numbers. It's by Dimitri Mayos, and it's MEAX. I worked with him when I was at Ogilvy, and it's a great book, especially for entrepreneurs. It's very simplistic, so it's not something that's hard to learn. So I definitely encourage you to entrepreneurs, especially females, please buy this book. It's not that long. It's about, I think it's 250 pages. Very easy, gives you step by step how you use data, why data is important, what other tools are out there that can help you measure your business and the growth of your business. It helps a lot. What we do as data scientists, what I do as a marketing strategist, is really important to company. So I don't take my role lightly at all. And I think that entrepreneurs should either hire a data scientist, a marketing analyst to come and work with them, or they should try to get into the numbers on their own. You don't have to be an expert. You can just see on your analytics dashboard how you're doing. What's the bounce rate? How many people are coming to your site? How many pages are they looking when they come to your site? Those things are important.
Yeah, I think often too, even though people see that, at least the sentiments I've heard over time is people may not know what to do with that, and how to interpret that data. So that book recommendation is a great idea that you've given. But I'm curious too for you, with people saying, yeah, I see all this data, but what do I do with it? I'm not an analyst like you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So my reaction to that is, here is what you do. Like I always say this, like ask yourself, like let's say, for instance, I had a client who was like my friend, a really good friend, and she had a website, and she was like, Lilian, what's going on with my website? I'm not getting as much. She had a lot of traffic, but the engagement level in terms of how long people were spending on her site was like 10 seconds. And she didn't know this because she didn't look at her data that closely. She was just looking at the total number of people that was coming to the site. And she's like, I'm not noticing that they're going to other pages. And I was like, well, did you know that they're spending 10 seconds on your site? So when you find out that people are spending 10 seconds on your site, you then have to ask yourself, okay, how are they getting to my site? What devices are they using? Are they using their desktop? Are they using their phone? A lot of times, some websites are not mobile friendly. So I went on my friend's website and I looked at her analytics and I said to myself that Okay, if 80% of your visitors are coming to your site via their mobile phone, let's look at how your website, shows up on the mobile phone. So I went on her website, I looked at it, and I realized that a lot of this text was kind of like messed up on the site. So if 80% of your visitors are coming to your site, and your site, then they're coming through the mobile phone, and then you open your website and you see that the text is just kind of moved somehow. The images look funny. It doesn't look well. The images are, we call it, they call it responsive design, which is a technology that you can use on your site to help it make it mobile ready. Back then we had like every website would have mobile.macy's.com, then you know that it's particularly for mobile. But now you have a responsive design that just automatically adjusts the screen, the size of the image of your website to your phone. So I told her, I was like, okay, first thing you need to do is let's fix this. Let's make this responsive. Let's enable responsive design for your phones, for your website. It was easy. It was already there. She just needed to turn it on. So she talked to her web developer. They fixed that. As soon as we fixed that, the number of engagement went from 10 seconds to about 1.5 minutes, which is almost 2 minutes, which is great. And then I started to look at, all right, so she was like, oh my God, our thing went up. So I said to her, I was like, that's great news. Now let's look at, a lot of times people want to put in so much information on one website because you're like, I just want them to click around and da-da-da-da-da-da. But you have to remember that, this is me getting into the boats of this whole behavior thing. But just to give you guys, just to give you an audience and a way of understanding. Like of how do you really follow a user to really understand that you're giving them the best experience on your site. So even as a business owner yourself, you can easily go onto your phone and say, all right, how is my phone interpreting via phone? How's my website interpreting via phone? How's my website also showing up on a tablet, right? So you can check that on your own. That's not something that you need someone to do for you, right? And then you can just send a report to your web developer and say, all right, I need you to fix this right away. And they'll do it for you. Yeah. And then the other things is like that people should look at is bounce rate. Now, bounce rate is defined, multiple ways. Bounce rate is really the rate in which someone comes to your website and leave. The average bounce rate is less than 50%. The best bounce rate are in the 40%. So it means that 40% of the time when people come to your website, they leave. So that means 60% of the time, people stay on your website. So if you have a bounce rate that's above 50%, that's something that you should be concerned about. You want to look at what pages are they bouncing from, like why are they bouncing? Do you have too much content on the page and not enough images? Because again, people like to digest things in slices. Like they want, they may not read the full content, but if you have enough engaging content, like the first paragraph on your website is important, right? Because they're going to start there. The images you put on your website is also important. Make sure that they're clean images, not blurry images. A lot of times people are like, oh, no one cares about the image. Yes, they do. If they see that your website, you didn't spend enough time to put the right images on there, they'll leave. They want clean, refreshing images when they come to your website. So those things that you can do to kind of help make the experience on the website a little more pleasant is important. So when Alex always tells me that the way that I look at website is very different from the way other people look at website. Like I've seen one website that I would go on there, I'll try to load up the video, and the video is like, sorry, error page. And I'm just like, wow, why is this page not working? So that can encourage a higher bounce rate because now I leave because I'm like, hey, the video is not working. So why should I why should I stay on the site when they have one unfunctional activity on their site? Yeah. So it turns the customer away.
I would also add great points, by the way. Excellent points. And I would also add the speed. The speed of the site, especially if you have international subscribers or whatever. I mean, to just stay there for like hours, depending on the data plan that they have and they can't access your site, then you have that high bounce rate as well. So speed. Yeah. Wow, great tips.
Yeah, so what we call that is load time. So the load time of your website is really important. You don't want it to, the average load time, it's it shouldn't be more than 10 seconds. Your website should just load like within seconds. And if you're not sure about what your load time is for your website, what the speed is of your website, you can always use Google. Google has a load time tool. All you have to do is put your website on there, and it tells you right away what the load time is, and actually gives you feedback right away and say it's too slow or too fast, or you're good. So it'll give you the red light, the yellow light, or the green light. So that way you know that you're okay. If you have an international or global website, you want to make sure that the speed in which your website loads, it's comparable to everything else, because that could turn people away. That could also encourage a higher bounce if the load time is super slow.
Okay, so let's take all of this and synthesize it, or integrate it to talking about the TDMP movie. Why a movie like the Dance Movie Project, and why now?
I think for the filmmaker, TDMP now makes sense because, again, there's a huge appetite for Afrobeat, music in the world today. I mean, they're all generated in Africa. Now there's a collaboration with Drake, and there's a lot. Jay-Z just signed on Tiwa Savage as part of his team now. So there's all these collaborations that we see, and there's a huge appetite for it. And so Alex felt that it was really important to talk about the struggles as well, because by recognizing and celebrating this genre, we also need to recognize the people behind it that makes Afrobeat such a huge sensation, which is the dancers, right? So this is a story about a group of young men who are in high school, and they all have this passion for dance. And then it touches on something that I think it's an African issue, but I think it's an issue that everyone can kind of relate to globally as well. It's parents want the best for their children. So their parents want to nurture their children and encourage their children to be doctors and lawyers and bankers or professors or what have you, whereas there are also some other appetite for different type of profession. So this movie was talking, focused specifically on the Afrobeat, the fact. So there's a lot of the very popular music in there, but it tells a story about these young boys and their passion for dance, and how that passion for dance kind of transition on to, how they view their community, how they help their mom, and things like that. And so the timing, I think, is perfect because, one, there's a huge appetite, and I think people are curious to understand what's the origin of Afrobeats. What is Afrobeat? How do I relate to it? I think it kind of evolved from a dance move to then the music, or the music, and then it's they're all very much synonymous. And the relationship is definitely there. But more importantly, the movie was supposed to kind of tell a story about what it is to be a dancer in this day and age, and how supportive and unsupportive parents are. And it's a great emphasis on just why should we nurture talent in general, right? And that's, I think, the main premise of the story.
And that's so significant, too, I think, because culturally, here in the States, we have a lot more parents willing to let kids sort of figure out what they want to become or do. And when you contrast that with Africa, you do tend to have a lot of parents say, you're going to be X, Y, Z, and that's it, with no flexibility for the creative industry or the entertainment industry, particularly when you're talking about fashion, film, music. So sort of really emphasizing that is great. I want to go a different direction and actually hone in completely now in the whole diabetes thing, and specifically as it relates to women. I know I was reading a couple of months ago about diabetes in Africa, and that it was a major epidemic that no one is paying attention to. And for a different radio podcast show, when I was interviewing one of the top executives, if you will, in Nigeria, one of the things he mentioned, the former minister in the telecommunications realm, one of the things he mentioned was it was really glaring and nobody was paying attention to it. So let's bring it back home here to this movie and talk a little bit about diabetes specifically in general. I know you had some great numbers. And then independent of that, how that's tying into women in general in the African diaspora as well as on the continent.
Yeah. You know, it's such a great question. And I think for one thing I really enjoyed about just the writers, Alexander Zora's perspective on this was, yes, I want to celebrate this dance culture. I want to celebrate the Afrobeats, but it's also important to use this platform to call attention to a disease that it's an epidemic in Africa, right? And one that people frown upon. And there's actually more people affected by diabetes than HIV/AIDS, and I think that alone is scary to know that everyone, whenever you think AIDS, you're like, oh, Africans have a lot of AIDS. No, they have a lot of diabetes. And the other thing that I think it's important, which you mentioned, is the role that women play. We know that in our continent, in Africa, women are responsible for what the family eats, right? Mm-hmm. So they play a very key role in understanding like what kind of meals to give people and what kind of meals to provide for their family. And if we don't start educating moms, because again, if you think about it, a lot of what they know has been transferred on from their moms, is passed down, those things. And there's certain new food that has been introduced to us Africans that's kind of encouraged the spread of the disease. Unfortunately, we eat more carbs. And we don't really exercise. It's not part of our culture to exercise. Music is actually a great way to exercise, but can we get more moms to dance? Maybe through this movie. So I think the struggle is trying to figure out a way to educate more women so that they can feed themselves and their family, healthier way and really diminish the existence or the persistence of diabetes in general. And that's what we're trying to focus on in this movie.
Lilian, though, do you think that exercise is really an issue, or is diabetes more of an issue with, when I read that article I told you about, is diabetes more an issue of a problem for the wealthy or upper class in Africa? Because the average person, we're told here in the States and globally in Africa, can barely afford $1 a day. So where do they get to the point where they can even afford to get to having diabetes? Do you know that?
And I think that's a very good point. Like that's the scary part, is that the most people that are affected by the disease are the people. Because if you think about it, carbs are cheaper. It's cheap to buy rice. It's cheaper to buy curry. It's cheaper to buy these pounded yam and things like that. And those things are inexpensive, right? The expensive stuff are the stuff that are more nutritious. And if you think about it, even that, like nutrition in itself, it's a global crisis in terms of cost. Here in the U.S. or in the Western society, we try to discourage, the inner city people from going to get fast food, whereas sometimes they have a dollar menu. They have cheaper food that it's cheaper for them to buy that than to go to the grocery stores and buy the burger meat, to buy the bread, to buy the spinach and all the lettuce and things like that. So who does it affect the most in the continent? Yes, it affects, lower income people, unfortunately. But surprisingly, I think there is an income gap between the disease. But to be quite honest, I think because we naturally have poor eating habits in Africa, that it affects both the rich and the poor. I know that, certain people, and I don't want to mention their name, but certain leaders who are currently leading our continent right now have diabetes, and they haven't come out and said it because it's something that people are embarrassed to talk about. So whether they're rich or not, they still have poor eating habits, and people don't realize that, the more you consume certain food, the more you raise your glucose level, which is good sometimes, but it's also bad because it could really lead to diabetes of different sorts. So great question of is there, an economic gap between who it affects the most? I think it affects the poor people the most because, quite honest, it goes undetected. Okay, if you have money in a place like Africa, you have a doctor, right? There's an assumption that you have what they call a PCP, a primary care physician, who you talk to. Whereas if you are from a lower income you might go to your village doctor and he might look at you and give you some recommendation on what you should do. But in order to get those specialty treatment where you actually go and test your blood level, you test your glucose level, those things are very expensive. So there's also that medical piece too that requires some attention because there's not enough funding for lower income people to get proper health care. I mean, Obamacare was a huge phenomenon in the U.S. and everyone was really pleased. Those people who can't afford health care. So health care is an issue that, something that we need to definitely take care of and figure out a way to help inner city, like rural area in Africa, to help them kind of fight the disease or the spread of the disease. Because some people have, the type 1 or they're pre-diabetic, right? And they could have been saved if they had spotted disease much earlier, right? So we have two issues at play. One is, sometimes diabetes is definitely not an economic issue. It's more of a dietary issue. But the reason why the reason why lower income people are affected the most is because they don't have access to health care or proper health care. So that's how we kind of transition it or explain it rather.
Okay, so I want to break it into two areas from a standpoint of one who grew up, in the city over Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, and one who visited periodically the rural areos where my family hails from, and most people, their family hails from as well, in most African countries, So I would think that the issue and accessibility or diabetes is not so much in the rural areas, because for the most part, you're still having a lot of the rural areas going to the farms to plant their food and still eat fresh food. So whereas in the city, everything is processed and you have Indomie noodles, for example, across the continent. You're more likely to buy processed food in the city or bigger cities than you are in the farms where you're still going to the farm to get your food. So where your indication that the issue is more rural.
No, it wasn't so much that I was saying rural. I was saying lower income. So lower incomes could exist in the rural area as well as in the city, right? The point that I was really trying to make, and if we even want to own in on the rural area, we know that climate change is a huge issue. So back then we had the ability for people to actually farm locally. Not all rural areas actually have farms. They don't necessarily have farms, right? They have to go and purchase this food that are sometimes manufactured or transported into the country. So what we found, if you look at the way that certain parts of Nigeria, even certain parts of Africa is, a lot of the food are imported. Remember I talked about earlier that some of the challenges that we face, the reason why diabetes become more and more prevalent in our culture is because some of these foods are introduced into our community. It's not something that we actually started eating on our own, right? So that's one element too that we definitely need to focus on at a later date. But it's a concern that we need to also caution ourselves with. So when I met rural area, I think I mentioned as one of the areas that could be impacted by, because I was talking about the health care, the lack of access to health care, right? And obviously when you think about that, you think about the rural area because they don't have that accessibility to proper health care providers, right? But in terms of like who's being impacted the most, it is the lower income. And I think that the impact of the lower income, depending on where they stay, has to do with the fact that they don't have access to proper health care. Yeah. So even when even when they're pre-diabetic, they can't go back to remission because they don't have access to proper health care. So it becomes something that is like kind of, you're pre-diabetic and then you don't get the opportunity to go into remission because you didn't know you had it. The article that I sent you had, say that 70% of people who have diabetes don't know they have diabetes, which is scary. Yeah.
It is scary. It is scary. And actually, when I think back about a lot of people I know back then, and even I would say my maternal grandmother might have potentially had diabetes because the complaints she had back then seemed to square with having diabetes, although that was never confirmed. But yes, access. So you're saying nutrition is one thing, and then independent of nutrition, you've got to deal with the issue of access as well to healthcare to prevent it becoming worse. So let's
and I just want to add that like when I say nutrition, I mean diet. You know what I mean? Like I think for us, we have to really clarify what we mean by nutrition. Yeah. Your diet has to change a little bit so that you can fight the instance of diabetes or pre-diabetic.
And actually, that's my final point before we get a sense of where our listeners can go watch this movie for those on the continent as well as here in the U.S. So my final point on that is let's break it down on a cultural standpoint for what that looks like. The average, I'll start with Nigeria just because you guys are going into Nigeria to premiere the movie. So if you're serving from a cultural standpoint, you're adding respect to it, you're adding wealth, income level, etc. And whether whether you have wealth or not, if I'm going to serve you food, and gender, and you add a gender into it, number one, if it's male, you better make sure you have more than 5, 6, or 7 meats. All kinds of assorted meats in it. I want to bring it down to that basic level so someone listening can understand how that translates with diet that we're talking about. Right. So if I'm having a plate of soup, can have easily 10 pieces of meat and all assorted in huge amounts, and then you serve it with second-hand carbohydrates that have been stripped, whether it's white rice or we're talking cassava and processed gazillion times to create the gari. So you have that, and for all intended purposes, it's almost an insult not to serve soft drinks, whether you're talking Malta or Fanta or Sprite or what have you, has to be served with that to be washed down. So how do we change this mentality in this decades of culture that says the best way to serve, the best way, and starting with our women who are listening to this, this is the epitome of what it means to have the perfect meal and to be well fed in African society. How do we change that?
And I think, to be quite honest, that's always like the pre-diabetic and the diabetes question. Like that's the $1 million question, is that how do we prevent this disease from happening, especially when culturally we eat certain food. And eating certain food or the ability to eat certain food makes you feel good about, your socioeconomic status in the world. Whereas, so one thing that I would say is that the way to kind of maybe simplify it another layer is that it depends on your weight, right? If you are if you know that you're slightly heavier than the average person, you want to make sure that you're not taking on too much carbohydrates, because that, can lead to, pre-diabetic instance. So I would say that, definitely eat more proteins, try to get more vegetables in there. Eat less starch. I'm not saying like definitely alleviate it from your diet, but eat a little less, instead of having a bowl of, pounded yam, maybe you can just have a small little piece of pounded yam and try to find other substitutes so that you feel full. Because I think that's another thing in Nigeria, that the ability to be able to eat and feel full, like not in Nigeria alone, but just in the continent, it's a good thing. It's a blessing. You feel like, thank God I'm full today. But at the same time, you want to watch it. So the biggest
Lilian,
focus would be on...
Hold on a sec. Before you go on, I have to insert what the average Nigerian person or African will say. They'll say, this one not grammar now. This one is Oyinbo. So translated to non-Nigerian listeners and African listeners, it simply means, okay, you're just speaking way too much like grammar, way too much overeducated intellectualism. That doesn't apply to us. Can you speak plain English for us to understand what you're saying? What do you mean not, cut down your pounded yam and do this and that? So how do we connect and communicate this message, considering it's an epidemic and we're having people say on the continent, this is an epidemic, and we have a movie that's showing us this is a problem. How do we translate it in English where it's not intellectuals having a discussion and it's all nice and cool, and then we move on.
Yeah. I mean, here it goes. Like it calls out another challenge that we face. It's not so much. And I remember when I was sitting in a meeting with Alex and Nestle and a couple of other people at Arete Worldwide, which is a diabetic organization as well here in the U.S. We were talking about the effectiveness of communicating. Like you just said, like people are just thinking like, okay, this is all grammar. The grammar is important. The educational piece is important. How do you tell someone who's like, I remember someone who has diabetes who's dealing with the disease. He was like, listen, this is all I know to eat. Like, what else? How can I change my diet when this is when I think about food? This is I've known to eat. This is what my parents taught me. This is what my mom fed me. And now I have a problem and I don't know what else to eat, right? So it calls on the fact that we need to have more. Like this is an individual problem, but to be honest, this is a societal problem as well. We need to get the health community involved, and that's what we're trying to do with the partnership with Nestle, is how do we get the nurses and the health providers in Africa, in Nigeria specifically, involved with providing the education, right? And then how do we, simplify the education that the average person in Nigeria understands it without, it sounding like a lecture or too much grammar, like you said earlier. Like how do you explain to them that, you should cut back on yams, like all these things is going to lead to. And I think we have to address it in like I said, based on your weight side, like you see this images where they have a guy who's about 150 pounds, you have a guy who's 120 pounds, and you have another guy who's 200 pounds, and then say that here is a recommended diet on what you should do. And we need to figure out a more effective way to communicate that. And that has to do with, bringing in like experts who study this field, who understand diabetes. I don't want to claim that I'm an expert. I'm definitely more of a consumer who's concerned about this issue and who's trying to create awareness by joining these communities together, joining these expertise together to provide the knowledge that my people need in order to fight the disease or cope with the disease if they already have it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the part where the movie touches on some of the things that they need to change, right? Eating less rice, like all these starchy things, we need to like just reduce it and
less
do something.
White rice, right? Because
less white rice, less. We need to eat something that has high fiber, more wheat. Maybe semolina instead of pounded yam. You know what I mean? Like there's these alternatives that we can. And I know semo is not as yummy as, pounded yam, but you have to, for your health's sake, you have to do that. And the funny thing is, like, some people feel like it doesn't impact me. That's why I said that we need to focus on the size of the person, right? Because you're like, people are like, well, I don't have diabetes, but I'm 200 pounds. But you're just like, hey, listen, you're borderline, what they call you're pre-diabetic, is what most Americans, doctors will call you, if you're overweight, and you're not diabetic, but you're pre-diabetic because you're just one instance away from actually getting the disease. So you need to be very careful and make sure that you exercise, right? You burn it off somehow, and that you eat less of these starchy things. Yeah, that are more yummy than other non-starchy things. Like we have to have. I mean, even I know how much rice I eat in a week. Just imagine someone tells me, "Oh, you have to cut back on rice." Yeah, I'll be like, "Oh, that's gonna be tough."
You know what we didn't do, and I sort of made the assumption, was even define diabetes and the types, because we just made the assumption that people have heard it and know what it is. Do you mind defining it and the different types?
Yes, I can definitely make a very strong attempt
as best as you can,
define it.
For people who may be listening, what is diabetes?
Yeah. So, and to me, maybe it's the educator that I am. I'm going to define it, and this is based on like diabetes organization, what it is, right? Diabetes symptoms vary depending on how much blood sugar is elevated. Some people, especially those with pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, may not experience symptoms initially, right? In type 1, symptoms tend to come more come on quickly and be more severe. So some of the signs for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes are increased thirst, frequent urination, extreme hunger, unexplained weight loss, right? Fatigue, irritability, blurry vision, slow healing sores. So if you have a sore on your hand, it takes longer. Right? Frequent infections such as gums or skin infection, or even vaginal infections as well. Right?
Wow.
So here's what we know about type 1. Although type 1 diabetes can be developed at any age, again, a lot of people think that, it only happens to old people. It can actually happen to any age. It typically appears during childhood or adolescence. Again, sometimes it's because they are a little bit overweight. Right? Type 2, on the other hand, is more common type, and that also can develop at any age, though it's more common in people older than 40. Right? So they say, so this is important to add, what do you say when you see a doctor? If you suspect that someone you know has diabetes, here's what you have to do. You contact your doctor early to talk about some of the conditions that you feel, right? And then if you think that you're already diabetics, if you feel like you have diabetes based on the different symptoms that I explained earlier, you kind of want to follow up on your doctor to kind of figure out a way to stabilize your blood sugar level, right? Just to kind of explain it in a more simpler way, what causes diabetes. It's pretty much your glucose level, a source of energy for the cells that make up your muscle and other tissue, right? Glucose comes from major food. It comes from two types of sources. It comes from your food as well as your liver. Sugar is absorbed into the bloodstream where it enters the cell, and then it helps with the insulin, right? So if your insulin level is elevated, you're more likely to be diabetic, right? So your liver stores and makes glucose. So your body actually provides the glucose, right, through your liver. And then the food itself that you take on, like the sweets and the carbs, they also create glucose levels. So just imagine it's more elevated with someone who has diabetes. So when your glucose levels are low, such as when you haven't eaten in a while, the liver then breaks down the storage of what they call glycogen into the glucose to keep the glucose level at a normal rate. So your body itself through your liver actually creates and increases your glucose level when it's low. So sometimes people feel lightheaded when they haven't eaten. You feel like, oh my God, my blood sugar is low. Yeah. That's what's happening there. But your body naturally is supposed to kind of create it. So when you have an elevated glucose level or low glucose level, your body's working, but then for people who are diabetic, they eat a lot. So the food itself is creating the glucose. So just imagine the conflict that your body is dealing with when dealing with all of that.
Wow.
So just to quickly add, so pregnant women as well can actually, also pick up diabetes. There's something called gestational diabetes, which according to this, it said during the pregnancy, the placenta produces hormones to sustain your pregnancy. These hormones make up your cells more resistant to insulin. So normally, it comes from again, if you're pregnant, most pregnant women feel like eating a lot of sweet things. So you have to watch that as well, because too much sweet actually increases the growth of your child, and you don't want that. And also increases the level of glucose that you have in your body.
Wow, so I didn't know it increased the growth of your child. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so one of the tests that you take when you're pregnant is they test you for gestational diabetes. And to be quite honest, a lot of parents, a lot of moms have gestational diabetes, which they hope once the child is born, it would elevate. They'll definitely relieve, they'll relieve their bodies from that. But sometimes women become diabetic or pre-diabetic after they had the baby because they were diagnosed with gestational diabetes. Wow. And I know some people who've dealt with that and they've come through it, and I've had people who develop type 1 diabetes because when they had the child, their glucose level is still pretty elevated.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing all that information. Thank you for telling us about the dance movie project. We're very proud, Ladybrille, to be sponsoring the movie. Where can our listeners go and watch this movie? Starting first with Nigeria and then, of course, here in the States. Because the States, by the way, were always cheated with everything relating to Africa. It's like everyone on the continent gets all the best, and then we are like an afterthought. So it's good to see more engagement here from the music to fashion and film that we can get our hands on. So where can we go watch TDMP?
So, the movie maker, the producer of the movie, James Maverick and Alexander Aura, it was part of their plan to first have a global premiere in New York City, which was extremely successful, and then have a cinematic premiere as well. So for those of you who are in Nigeria, yay, here's a great opportunity to go watch the movie. So my recommendation is definitely go look up Film House Surulere, Ibadan, as well as Port Harcourt. They're going to have the movie listed there starting this Friday, September 9th. And then Silverbird, Festac, Uyo, as well as Abuja is also going to be featuring the movie, as well as Ozone Cinemas in Yaba and GDC Cinema in Aja. And I know that they're adding more cinemas as well, but those 3 areas, or 4 areas rather, are going to be showing them. The best place to go to find more information, because our distributor is Film One, is to go on to www.film1ng.com or come to TDMP's website, which is tdmpthemovie.com. And we're going to have all the local listing on there as well. And then it is our plan to have the movie be available on Netflix by the end of this year. So
awesome!
So everybody gets to see it globally.
Yes. Oh my God! Thank God for Netflix and chill. Then we can finally watch it. Because sometimes there are releases over the Nollywood films or just films in general, and it's like if you're here in the diaspora, you can't seem to get a hand on it. So it's really cool to hear that. That's exciting.
Yeah, and I want to add that we're going to have some more additional premieres as well. Like, we've been invited by so many different people to come to their city. So there's going to be a premiere in LA. We might have a premiere in DC. Definitely. So it'll be DC, Maryland, and Virginia. We'll just find a very good connection point that people can come. We've invited to Germany to do the premiere there. We've invited to Ireland to come do the premiere there.
Exciting.
So we're definitely getting a very positive reaction to this movie because of its first of its kind. The first Afrobeat dance movie. So people are just as excited as much as we are, and I think there's an appetite in, like you said, outside of the continent. People are like, we want to see the movie too. So we have plans to continue to do more premieres, and we're looking at the next few months to do the second one in a different city, and we haven't decided what city we're going to go with, but it's all in our plans to try to get it out to different countries and states within the U.S.
Awesome. Yeah. That's very exciting. Well, thank you so much, Lilian Ajayi-Ore, for blessing us with your time, sharing such amazing insights on marketing and strategic positioning of businesses and even just personal branding for our listeners, and then telling us about TDMP and even zooming in into more discussions on what that breakdown looks like on diabetes and the growth of Afrobeat music and so much more, and dance and most importantly being able to match to your own beat, even with family, and saying, look, this is what I want to do, including being a professional dancer if that's what you want. We appreciate everything. Thank you so much, and continued success, and of course we'll keep sharing the information on the Ladybrille platform to our audience. Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Ladybrille Woman Show. If you like what you just heard, then please pass along our web address, www.ladybrillmag.com, to your friends, family, and colleagues. And be sure to check out our website for previous podcast episodes and to subscribe to the show. You can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. This has been a Ladybrille production. Join us next time for another edition of the Ladybrille Woman Show.